Welcome to our 7th episode of Ideas and Lives. Today, we're thrilled to have Dave Lerman, who is one of the South Bend Lermans, of which I am a part. And Dave was an amazing executive, named Executive of the Year by Mental Center News in 2004. He's been a great athlete. He's been a great leader, and I know him as a great mensch. So, leader of our family.
And you're not biased in any way.
No, I'm not biased in any way. It's very objective. And we have Tzvi Bodie, who is a financial economist and my partner on this effort. Tzvi.
Okay, taking over. And we decided that it makes sense for me to pose the questions, at least the first set of questions, to Dave. Dave, I think this is maybe the third time that we have met. So I'm objective.
Okay.
Now, you were for something like 40 years the head of the family business, an unusual family business. Why don't you tell us what the business is, what industry it's in, and what your role was?
Sure. Let me give you a little history of the family business. A business my dad started with a partner. It came from an offshoot of a failure. After World War II, my father was in his 4th attempt to run a business of his own. A fella came along with some money right after World War II, and they started making toy trucks and egg timers. And they needed some light gauge steel. And my dad had a very good friend who was a big buyer of steel. And in those days, there was really not enough steel to go around. There was a crushing demand for consumer goods coming out of World War II. And you had to stand in line to get steel. So his friend got him a small amount of steel so he could start the business. And after this fantastic big company with about 6 or 7 people in it that had to send their production people across the street to use the bathroom. We're making toy trucks. They found that there were a lot of them being rejected. I was 6 or 7 years old, and so we had a lot of these reject trucks we got to play with at our house. And at some point, they realized that this was not a business that was going to survive. By the way, they had this very modest name for the company. International Manufacturing Company. That seemed to go with their personalities. Might as well think big. But anyway, at some point, my father realized that he needed to pay some bills. In all his other attempts at business, even though he was not financially successful, he always paid his bills. This walking out under bankruptcy was never part of his ideas. So he did some checking, tried to find somebody in the community that used that type of steel, and got a hold of the fellow, and the guy asked him what he wanted. Dad thought he was going to have to take a hit on the steel, and the guy kept offering more and more. Dad didn't know what to think, and he kept his mouth shut. Finally, the guy, after doubling or tripling his own price, threatened to hang up on him, and Dad made the deal. And he immediately saw an opportunity. So he started calling around, seeing where else he could buy steel, and basically created a brokerage operation. His partner supplied the money. Dad never had a whole heck of a lot of money. And my dad had another fault. He was just a very, very nice person. And probably needed to be tougher. The other guy was not a very nice person, and taught my dad a lot about how to be tougher. At some point, that was kind of a successful marriage as they got started, got the brokerage business. As soon as they made enough money, my father wanted to make it into an ongoing business. All his kids, his partner had no kids. Dad grew up with a very loving family that supported each other. His father died when he was 10 years old. His mother was raising a 1.5-year-old daughter at the time, and everybody pitched in.
Was he born in the U.S.?
No, he was born in Canada. His father and mother had emigrated from Eastern Europe, and got a job as a rabbi in Sudbury, Ontario area, but eventually ended up in Rock Island, Illinois. Dad, at one point, was captain of his high school football team. At 5'5" and about 135 pounds. A Notre Dame scout was looking at a running back on the other team, and my dad made some great plays against the kid. And the coach, the scout, said to my dad, "Boy, you're a heck of a ball player. You really anticipate well. You might want to go to Notre Dame and try out. Maybe you could win a scholarship." So Dad saved up enough money in a year and went to Notre Dame as a freshman in 1931. By the way, the year Knute Rockne died, and played freshman football there. Made a couple of very good plays that embarrassed the varsity when he was scrimmaging against them. And they did a trap block on him, and he ended up in the hospital with a broken ankle, and that was the end of his football career. And he ran out of money, but he met our mother at a Jewish holiday dinner that he was invited to in South Bend. My mother came over from Eastern Europe also at the age of 2, and they started dating, and obviously it became a very serious relationship. If you call 10 kids a serious relationship. So
So they're transitioning from toys to steel.
yeah, so with that background and that determination, any opportunity Dad saw as a way to build a business kept going in his head. And as they made a fair amount of money, which they did, he bought a lift truck, he bought a little re-square shear, hired a couple of guys who knew how to run a piece of equipment and even fix it, and just continued to grow the business. In 1950, he bought 5 acres of land on Tucker Drive, which is where we are right now, except we've bought a bunch more land and we have about 50 some acres out here. And he built about a 14,000 foot building and started a real steel service center.
Dave, maybe not everyone knows what a service
So
center
what
is.
is a steel service center? A steel service center is we're in the chain of supply, buying steel from steel mills and selling it to end user manufacturers, original equipment manufacturers, and often parts makers, stamping companies, fabrication companies who may be supplying given industries. In our case, our heaviest customer base is people that are in the agricultural equipment business, trucks, truck trailers, construction equipment, cranes, heavy equipment, because we specialize in doing some very special, unusual things with some of the thicker steels, the super high strength steels that have come out. We've always tried to get ourselves at the leading edge of the industry as the industry has developed more and more sophisticated steels to meet the growing requirements.
So we buy steel and then we do something to the steel in between the buying
Right.
and then
So
selling it.
originally, we did the real simple things. We bought sheets and sheared them into smaller pieces. In many cases, we were buying secondary steel that had something wrong with it, like say a wavy edge, and then you shear the bad edges off and supply it to somebody that uses it in small pieces. Over a period of time, we bought used equipment and brought in steel in coils, like a roll of steel, and leveled it out into sheets. In some cases, supplied the sheets. In other cases, did the second process, we would be shearing it up to a specific size for the customer. Later on, we put in equipment called a slitting line. This was all under my father's direction and partnership from the 1950s on through the early 60s. He bought something called a slitting line. Slitting line is where you take a coil of steel of reasonable width, like say 48 inches wide, and you run it through you uncoil the steel, run it through a set of circular knives, and then wind the cuts up. So you could take a 48-inch coil and cut it into 4 12-inch cuts that a customer may need, or one 24-inch cut, one 12-inch cut, ship it to different customers. But you buy the given thickness that the end customer wants, and the different chemistry the end customer wants from the mills. We specify that, and then we sell to the end customer and go through the process of doing partial manufacturing on the steel. In the very early 60s, we added a fourth process called pickling. The steel we typically have dealt with and became experts at was called hot roll coils. That's the first step in flat roll processing as the steel comes from the steel mills. And during that process of rolling from a slab to a coil by the steel mills, a product called scale comes on top of the steel. It's kind of like sandy product that is not helpful to the next manufacturing cycle. So you can do this process called pickling, where you put the steel through an acid bath and it absorbs the scale, leaving you with a cleaner surface. And then you dip it in oil to protect the surface from rusting right away. So it's called pickling and oiling. And that was a batch process my father came up with. I actually copied it from another fellow he knew in the business. Those are the main processes we do to this day, although we've had some intermediate products that could be done by either our customer, a fabricator, or we do for them. A lot of laser burning of parts or plasma burning of parts. It's all part of the supply cycle of buying steel from steel mills, doing various amounts of processing it, and carrying it on to whoever does the fabricated parts or stamped parts that then go on to assembly by the original equipment manufacturers.
What other, who else would be your customers aside from agricultural equipment manufacturers? Automobile industry?
The automobile industry definitely buys a lot of steel and buys a lot of it that gets processed through custom suppliers like us. We do a little bit of that, but we actually try to concentrate not in the automobile business. We try to concentrate in the heavier steels, and we do something a little more special.
Well, we have the oil goods, the people that build, that are trying to do fracking or other oil, building oil wells and that sort of thing. No,
we sell to guys that make propane tanks. We sell to guys that make construction equipment like scissor lifts and big hydraulic cranes.
Right, but not consumer products. You're mostly
No, we don't sell.
produced product, right?
We're not an end supplier.
Right.
We sell mostly through the supply chain. A lot of the big original equipment manufacturers don't make a lot of their own parts anymore, and subcontract a lot of their part making or sub-assembly making in some cases to subcontractors. And then they do, basic big guys now do design work, assembly work, marketing work. But they generally don't make some make a certain number of parts, but they generally don't make nearly as many parts. They used to make the whole thing themselves, a lot of these guys, like Deere, Ace, Caterpillar, even the big automobile guys used to do most of their own stamping work. But the industry has changed. And it's probably more efficient today. It's not nearly as big company oriented. So there's a lot more smaller producers. There's also a fair amount of parts that come from overseas.
but Dave, so given what you talked about, what do you think the comparative advantage, first of all, of steel service centers, and then of our steel service center over even the mill, just sending the parts, sending the steel to the people that make the parts, or other types of competitors? What's the comparative advantage?
Well, for an OEM, an original equipment manufacturer, it's a pretty good deal in the sense that he reduces his investment tremendously in manufacturing. He pays for his parts usually slowly, unfortunately, So by the time he pays his suppliers for all the parts that go in there, he's made a product already and he's billing it. So his cash turnover is much quicker. He concentrates on what he thinks he's good at, which is designing the product, selling the product, interacting with customers to change what's needed to be at the best product, and lets those that are going to make a living at just stamping parts and becoming most efficient at just doing that and taking care of the tools and dies. And so breaking it up into smaller groups of people who have to make a living in what they do and do it better than the other guy could do it by himself, it's a challenge. And we're a part of that process. Generally speaking, the steel mills we buy from make millions of tons. We happen to be a fairly big buyer of steel, and we buy 1.5 million tons a year out of probably 65 million tons of flat roll that's produced in this country for manufacturing. So we're a pretty big supplier, but there's always a bigger guy. Lermans know about dealing with bigger guys.
Whatever happened to your father's partner, who was not such a nice guy?
Well, a little part of the background of the story is all of us kids, including Bob, were part of our education was working in the shop during the summers, stacking steel behind a shear, doing shipping, receiving, gassing trucks, occasionally running a crane, running some of the equipment. And we got to know the working man. And I think that was a great education for all of us. Guys that lived from payday to payday, guys that really worked with their hands, many of them who had very little education. Delightful guys, lots of fun, interesting personalities. In our case, our shop was quite mixed and color, creed, and everything else. So we had some great opportunities to grow and know people other than just in our own little group. We also always got lessons in business from my father, who loved the business. Going through so many tough times, he just thought this is the greatest thing in the whole world, to be able to make a really good living in a business where you deal with professional people.
And be your own boss, I think.
Pardon me?
Be your own boss.
Yeah. And so
Now
some of us grew up with an enjoyment of learning the business. In my case, I was the first one out of college, got an engineering degree, and then I decided I probably wasn't going to be the greatest engineer. I was a C guy. So then I went and got a master's degree. We had a small wedding, and so there was a little money left over from the in-laws. We went to graduate school. And after that, I went to work with a company called RCA, the old Radio Corporation of America, in the defense and space business. And I worked in that business for 4 years. In 1966, my dad came to me and said, we're getting along worse and worse. A couple people have tried to help me figure out how I could borrow enough money to buy the partner out. And I'd like you to join me in the business. What do you think? And I looked at the deal with my expert business education and said, Dad, this is a lousy deal. You do all the work. You know the damn business. All he does is gripe at you. You're paying him almost the value of the business. And he said, well, we're still negotiating, still negotiating. And then he came back and the deal actually got worse over a few more discussions because this guy did know how to negotiate. He knew how bad Dad wanted to get out from under him. And he played it to the hill. And I repeated my comments to Dad. And Dad said, you know what, Dave? You don't know what the hell you're talking about. You're valuing the business as though the partner's there. Get rid of that partner and you join the business, and maybe a couple of your brothers join the business. This business is worth 10 times what this thing is. So I ain't asking you anymore what you think of the deal. Are you in or are you out? And I said, okay, Dad, I'm in.
And he was right.
Yeah, he was right. So the end of 66, I joined him in the business, and I walked in the door the first day, and Dad said, by that time he had I'd say about 100 people in the shop and maybe about 20 people in the office. And he was probably selling about 3,000 tons a month of steel, pretty good for a small plant in South Bend. And he said, okay, Dave, what part of the business you want to run? Dad, 26 years old. What the hell do I know about running a business? Bullshit. You've been here all this time. You know the damn business. What part of the business you want to run? I said, well, I'll run the shop. Okay, you run the shop. I'll do the buying and the selling. And that's how we started. And we particularly had a problem in the shop because my dad's partner would rather screw somebody for a couple bucks than make it legitimate. It just seemed that way. And he took advantage of the plant guys to the point where I walked in and there was a union contract that had been negotiated 3 years before for renewal. And these guys were so mad the way they got treated over that 3 years, they were going to strike no matter what the heck was going on. And here we were borrowed up as much as we could be and looked like we were headed for a strike. There's a whole very long story behind that that I won't get into, but
did they strike?
No. No, they didn't strike.
They backed down.
We ended up being able to get the international union involved, and we're giving them a fair price increase. And the union was looking at it like getting back at the old man. And the international finally talked the guys into knowing you got a nice increase. Sounds to us like that guy's gone and you should have a good relationship going forward. But it took a lot of threats and various issues, and we got through it.
What union was it?
International Union of Electrical Workers.
Uh-huh.
And we still have that union here to this day.
And you have reasonable relations with them?
Yeah, we have very good relationships with them. Over a period of time, here's a perfect example. We have the union grievance thing, like most union companies have. If a foreman instructs somebody to do something and they're supposed to do it, they have to do it. And then they file a grievance because the foreman was unfair or he didn't talk right to them or whatever. And so it goes through a first step where you try to understand what really happened, then a second step where you get somebody to try to work something out. And then if you can't do that, it goes to a third step, which you bring in a outside moderator to determine who's right. So over a period of time, we've developed enough of a relationship with the union where they said, you know, we don't want to pay our share of these third step guys that come in and make the rules. Brother Jerry, our lawyer, Jerry's solid and honest, and we trust him. So we want him to be the third step determination guy. Well, he works for the company. Well, they know he'll be fair. So over a period of time, we've developed a good relationship with our unions. As we treat them very fair, and they know it. And there's the negotiation always, the new contract always gets negotiated till the last hour just before. But whatever we end up giving them, they accept because they know we're going to treat them fair. We went through some other challenges along the way, but it took years to get that kind of confidence built up in our people.
Did you ever have a prolonged strike?
Yes, we did. That's another long story if you want me to get into it.
Well, before that, I do. But before that, how many members of the family are currently, the 10 siblings are in the business?
5 of us, 6 of us. I'm sorry. My sister Sally is in the business also. She's a lawyer.
And she's the only girl, right?
Yes.
1 girl and 9 boys.
Yeah.
And you're the oldest.
I'm the second oldest. My oldest brother is going into a much more honorable profession. He's a rabbi and a scholar.
In Borough Park, right? In Brooklyn.
Well, that's where he's been for many years, but he just moved to Lakewood.
Oh, yeah. New Jersey, right. All right. Now, the story of the strike. Let's hear it.
So after stumbling through that first negotiation, 3 years later, we had another negotiation. And again, last minute settled at a reasonable time, reasonable amount. The arguments were much more financial. And part of the issue was in the background was South Bend was a heavy manufacturing town. In those days, there were 3 major manufacturers that used a lot of steel right in this area, and they were the keys to the first big amounts of steel that we were able to process through here. One was Studebaker. One was a division of Bendix that made most all the brakes for Ford cars, the old style brakes, drum brakes, and Whirlpool, which was a manufacturer of laundry equipment in St. Joe, Michigan, which is probably about 34 miles away. And so we supplied all these guys, but they were all big CIO, UAW plants, and those plants made a heck of a lot more money than smaller companies. There was a big divide between giant union plants like that. And part of that was all their competitors were also union plants that had pretty close to the same wages nationally. And so the littler guys like ourselves were at a different level. I might add that we were much more open to take those of different colors and nationalities and all that stuff. Truth was that in those days, union plants could be very difficult about those types of things. So
They kept the minorities out. Was it white people only?
well, I don't know if they'll admit it or not, but I can tell you there were a lot of guys that worked for us that couldn't get jobs for a lot more money in other places. Some of it was education. Some of it was, my guess, bias.
Right.
Um,
So there was a wage gap.
the union contract that came, which would have been the third union contract that I negotiated, there was a bunch of young kids that we'd hired, and they decided that many of their fathers who also worked here, the only reason they didn't get paid those great big wages was because their fathers were just not strong enough, just accept whatever the old man wants, and they had some fire in them. Many of them were wise ass kids. And it happened to be during the wage price freeze of Nixon, where the maximum you could pay was 5%. So we were doing okay, and we were ready to pay 5%. And the kids demanded like 10 or 12%, or something way over the top. So it was easy. That's it. And the International was trying to get these guys under control because these young kids thought they knew everything about everything. And they were fighting and fighting. And the International came to us and said, well, why don't you just agree to pay the 10, 12%, and then it won't be allowed because 5% is max, and you'll get your contract. And I said, oh no, because that's a false promise, because 5% is what we can afford to pay. Anything above that's not what we can afford to pay. And if we got to have a fight, let's have it now. My dad and I both said, Dad used this language, we're not going to Studebaker ourselves out of business. And if you know any of the history of Studebaker, you understand.
Well, you might tell some of our listeners and watchers what that meant.
Studebaker just constantly agreed to the national contract of General Motors and Ford. They had an older manufacturing building that we're not nearly as efficient in. The local workforce was so spoiled that they had more wash-up time, they had easier rules in the plant, and they were not an efficient producer. They got by for a number of years because Studebaker led many places in design. And they had a nice car, but they could never produce at the costs that the other guys could, particularly since they did not grow, couldn't grow. And so eventually they got forced out of business. And so we said, if we die, we die with our shoes on. And so we took them on. It was an 11-week strike. At about the third or fourth week, maybe it was the fifth week, I was doing all the negotiating. I had a very, very good labor lawyer who was a tough, smart guy who was giving me good advice. And I said, okay, we're going to open up the damn plant. Bullshit. And so we started by just having all our foremen work. And I actually worked. I ran a crane in our pickle plant and during the day, and then I'd go into my office at the end of about 8-10 hours out in the shop and do whatever I needed to do there. And then in some cases, get some calls from the federal mediator. if you don't know what a federal mediator is, he's a guy that decides the two parties can't agree. So a federal mediator gets called in and he figures out who's the weaker of the two parties, and then he pushes the weaker one to give in. So there's not a strike, because a strike looks bad to the government.
And that was
That's the old way.
and that
It may
was
still be that way.
that's the law, right? That's the labor law, that you have to have mediation, or no?
You know, I don't even remember if it was the law or not. I mean, both sides are happy to have some guy in the middle
Right.
telling the other guy what he really means. So it's a good intermediary thing, but you have to have been in the business to know that this guy is not straight down the middle. He's trying to get a contract.
Right.
Okay. Which is a different approach than let these guys have their arguments and you just try to straighten them out. You know,
Yeah.
He puts a color on things.
Sure.
So, so we started doing work in-house, and we started building up steel that we could ship. In between time, we were still bringing some steel from the steel mills and shipping it to some of our competitors, or people that could do the same thing we could do, and they would process it for us, and then we'd ship from there to a customer. So we did some of that. And I was probably in the 6th or 7th week, I was threatening to start hiring guys, non-union guys. And I was threatening to start to ship. And it must have been about the 8th week or 9th week, I don't know, probably the 8th week, when there was an old-time foreman we had, tough black guy, smart as hell, but a street smart guy. And he used to stutter. You remember Bo Freeman?
Whoa, sure.
He was a tough guy. He came into my office one day and said, Dave, you know, you keep talking. When are you going to do something other than talk? I said, you know what, Bo, you're right. You're right. So he started hiring people. The union put up a picket line, went to court to get a stay. I remember over a weekend, I found a friend of mine told me that there was in those days, all truck drivers were union, so they wouldn't cross another union picket line. But there was some little independent guy that my friend said, he's crazy. He'll do anything. He don't give a damn. So you could hire him and he'd run that first truck through. And it's illegal anyway for these guys, because I got the stay for them to stop us. And you go from there. So the guy shows up, and it was actually on a Saturday morning over at our old plant too. And he brings his truck in, and we load the truck. And the union, which had their most of their guys over in our main plant a block or two away, hear that we're going to ship over there. They rush over there and they block the street. So I call the county sheriff and I tell him, get over here. This is an illegal blockage. You got to protect us and get us through this thing. So he comes out with about 4 of his deputies and he starts talking. Well, Dave, you know, somebody could get hurt. Da, 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 da. I said, that ain't my problem. I'm not backing down. I back down now, we lose. It's easy. Get these people to let us drive a truck through. And he just starts screwing around. And then I get a phone call from my father. Dave, what's going on? I said, well, Dad, I'm trying to get this truck through here. Yeah. Well, I hear there's all kinds of commotion and threats. And I said, yeah, it's part of the game. He said, well, Dave, maybe you should stop it. I said, Dad, we ain't stopping. He said, you're right, we ain't stopping. Okay, but do me a favor. Don't do anything for 30 minutes. I said, okay. So what my dad did was he went to see the local police guys. And Dad was always very friendly to all local cops. Every time we had Christmas turkeys extra, Dad always took them down to the police station. Every time we had some extra football tickets, because he felt these guys were awful hardworking guys and deserved it. So he had a lot of buddies down there. And he went down there and said, we've got to stay from the court. The county guys ain't got the damn balls to take care of it. We need some help here. That's what I heard afterwards, because about 25 minutes after his call to me, here comes about 10 police cars, South Bend City Police, and they didn't park way off someplace and come and talk to me. They went right up to the picket line and created a path. By then, this truck driver was scared out of his wits and he left, leaving his truck.
Whoa.
So then I had to call a guy who was in charge of our trucks. We had, I think at that time, about 15 trucks. And he had been one of our truck drivers, and he had a truck driver's license. And I said, come in here. We got to drive this truck through the picket line. And he was scared of shadow. And I kept saying, don't worry about it. I'm the bad guy. I'm going to get in the truck with you. If anybody's mad, they'll be mad at me. And we got in that truck. We drove through the picket line. Guys were saying some nasty things. Although they didn't really say them with such hatred, because by that time I knew a lot of the guys. But we sort of broke the back of the strike. And we had the union truck drivers that we had, which were Teamsters, didn't like the other guys anyway, but they couldn't break the picket line. So my dad, who years and years ago, one of his businesses was a trucking company and he drove his own trucks, started driving, said, I'll drive, you guys pack the truck up, I'll drive the truck through the picket line, take it over to a certain place, then our truck drivers will deliver it to a customer. And that's what we started doing. Well, the picket lines started trying to get in Dad's way until they found that Dad was not quite as good a truck driver as he used to be. And it was a little scary to get in the way. So
He didn't run over any of them, did he?
no, he didn't run over any of them. And then a little later, one of our other volunteers, who was a bit of a nutcase himself, was ready to walk through the picket line just to show him. He had been a World War II Navy fighter pilot, so he was ready.
He was
He
going
drove
to show.
through the picket line. And we kind of broke the strike. And we started hiring some folks, particularly in those days, some folks that were coming back from Vietnam and didn't worry so much about walking through a picket line. They needed a job. And then I get some conciliatory things from the federal mediator. Dave, if you just pay them another nickel over and above whatever you're offering, or a dime or whatever. I said, no, I'm not going to reward them for what they've done. It's fair, it's good, you know damn well, that's it. So Then I get another call from them a few days later. The International is embarrassed by this thing. And so they wanted to give you that nickel just to get the thing settled. So they're gonna, by then, most of the guys that worked here quit coming out to the picket lines.
Mhm.
So they were bringing pickets in from other union situations. And he said, they're going to get in your way. They're bringing lots of pickets. It's going to be miserable. The union, the International's calling for a meeting, and they'd love to just settle this thing. Otherwise, they're going to ramp up all the fights. And I said, we're done what we've done. And by then, by the way, I'd already had some phone calls from some of our good older time union guys. I said, Dave, we're sorry. We let these young guys lead us by the path. We want to come back to work. And so I said, well, guys, I think this thing's going to come to a halt. I don't think it'd be so good if you did right now. But if I don't get this thing worked out quickly, let's do it. And so the guy calls, so the union calls for this big meeting. And at some point during the meeting, trying to rile everybody up, interestingly enough, the young guys who had driven this whole damn process were getting sick of it because they thought it was going to be a good fight, and there wasn't a fight, and they lost their. And on top of that, most of them were living with their parents, and their parents were going to throw them out for what they've done. They said, well, we want to go back to work. And the union said, this is not a meeting about going back to work. This is a meeting about what we do to push the company to da-da-da-da-da. And then it became a big uprising. And everybody started yelling. They wanted a vote to go back to work. They demanded a vote to go back to work, and it must have sounded a little threatening to the union guys. So they had a vote, and the vote was to go back to work. And the union tried to stop it because they said, well, we don't even know if we have an offer on the table. So then I get a call from the union business agent, and he says, Dave, you know what happened? I said, yeah, I know what happened. I had 15 guys call me, jumping up and down, they're coming to work right then, like 11 o'clock in the morning. And he said, well, what are you going to do about the contract? There's no offer on the table. I said, our offer is the same offer you could have had the first goddamn day. Just get him back here. That's all. And that was the settlement. And unfortunately, in management history, you don't find situations where management stood up and you had a number of plants that became way too inefficient. But
Now, was that the last strike you had?
no, there was one more strike, and it occurred many years later. We had hired a plant manager who was a very, very bright guy. He knew all the words. He had been a high-end plant manager in other places, and he knew the language. And but he was kind of a very aloof guy. And the Lermans are not aloof. And the plant guys, the good old timers, begin to resent this. And he had been an officer in the Army. In fact, he kept his citations behind him in his office. And apparently he demanded that you kissed his ring in the shop. And the truth is that I was busy growing the company. It seemed like we had such a very professional plant manager. My brothers never really got too involved in the plant. And he just had built so much resentment. I just heard about it at the last minute. And I went and talked to some of my guys. Guys, what is it? Dave, I'm sorry, we're going to vote for a strike. I said, why? It's because of him. You know, I had a sick mother in Texas and he wouldn't give me time off so I could go see her. Stuff like that. And the more I found out about it, the more I was embarrassed. But it was too late. So we settled on the contract, and they rejected the contract. And 1 week later, they asked us to put up the contract again. We changed one little thing, and they voted it in.
And did that plant manager stay on, or did you get rid of him?
Not long.
Mm-hmm.
I called him in my office. And I told him he was the cause of the strike and that he needed to get better relationships with the employees. Maybe I needed to send him to a Dale Carnegie class. And his answer was, over my dead body.
Oh, whoa.
So I went to my brothers and I said, he's gone. They all thought, what do you mean? This guy's great. No, he was the cause of the strike.
Right.
And shame on me. And at that time, I brought my son Billy in, who had gone through business school, master's, and was running our truck fleet, which by then was about 50, 60 trucks. And Billy had worked through the shop. I said, Billy, I need you to take over the shop. And he did. Billy's a very personable guy. And we corrected the situation. So it was lessons for us too.
Yeah, of course. Now, you went through a period where you acquired other firms. What was the guiding principle? What was your guiding principle with regard to expanding by acquisition?
We didn't really seek them. They just sort of ended up there. The first one was a customer of ours that went broke. And we first tried to help them through it, and it didn't work. So we bought the company out of bankruptcy, thinking that he bought a lot of the steel that was some of the toughest stuff we got stuck with.
Oh, so you want
so
to salvage
we thought that would give us some strength to continue to be able to off-fall some stuff that we usually took losses on, and that we could correct the company. And we worked at it for a number of years. Part of the reason he failed was because it was a family business that competed with other family businesses. And over a period of time, the business became much more controlled by much bigger people that had much better access to supply. And we modernized the place, worked very hard at at trying to make it successful, but it was also used in construction, and construction was pretty lousy in the 80s. So we had customers going broke on us, and we got a lot better. We finally ended up selling the place for about what we paid for it. Didn't get a lot of the money back that we invested, but we learned a lot. And in the meantime, Steel Warehouse did use that operation as an off-fall for things. So Steel Warehouse made some money on it. And that was our first attempt. Our second big acquisition was with a local tubing company. They were actually in the third generation of running it themselves, and they had a partnership before that, so they're actually a very old company. And they were one of the first in the business of making electric well tubing. Electric well tubing is where you take a piece of steel, wide coils of steel, and it gets slit down to a specific width. And then in a roll forming process, that narrow strip gets bent into a circle. And then you have where the two sides of the steel come around to meet each other. You throw an arc across there and weld those pieces together. And now you have circular tube. And you can then bend that tube into squares, angles, and their shop specialized in very high quality tube that would often get chrome plated for the fancy furniture industries up in Grand Rapids and different places. They had a long history of doing a good job, but they're a very conservative company. They never really grew a lot. And interestingly enough, their father died about the same time my dad died.
Wow.
And
1975, was it?
yes. And there was one son that was in the business, but his father was an old timer, and his father didn't let his son immediately jump in and take charge of the business. So he didn't have the background. My dad pushed me to just be able to do everything here. And I didn't know it, but I think he knew it, that I was ready.
Right.
This other young man was a bright guy, terrific guy. And he also was pretty worried about it. I used to meet with him and help him. And he pretty well figured it out. He started growing the company. He hired a couple old timers to help him through what he didn't know, and was pretty successful. And then he had a younger brother join him, who was a very cocky guy. Was a sales-oriented guy, and all he wanted to do was grow without worrying about it. And they fought a lot. And the older brother at some point had some marriage problems, and he finally just turned the keys over to his younger brother. And over a period of time, the younger brother rented it as the ground. And they were always such a private company, always did what they said they would do. We never really paid too much attention. We always took care of them. We always got them special steel. We basically supplied them about 80 or 90% of the steel.
Were they doing the same kind of production as you, or were they a different?
Oh, they were making a product called.
Oh, they were, okay.
Electric well tubing.
I see.
Tubing went into the frames of hospital beds, chairs.
Right. So you wound up owning that business.
Yeah. And
And
part of the story is I at some point realized how much money they owed us and how much special steel we had. And I decided that my first job as running this company was to try to help run that company back on their feet. And I started going over there, and instead of the owner appreciating it, he resented it. And at some point, he let me know that. And then when I realized that 90% of the money he owed was to us, that I insisted that I try to help. And so I got to know, very fortunately, I got to know the weaknesses of the company and some of the strengths of the company to determine in my own mind, was it worth taking over? Because our banks all recommended against it. And so I had to talk my brothers into it. And I remember getting together with my, at that time, 3 other brothers that were in the business. And we took a hotel room, conference room someplace, and with an outside accountant, went through everything. We spent like 8 hours going through with me explaining why I knew damn well this was going to be successful. And in the end, the brothers supported me, and we bought the company in 1992, and made money the second month that we owned the company. And that company, which at that time, when we took over, it was in very bad shape. They had, I think, like 30 people in the plant. The plants in South Bend now have 250 people, and we have 2 other locations, one in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and one in Temple, Texas. And they're a pretty good supplier of all kinds of different electric weld tubing, and been very successful. It's a well-managed company.
So did it roughly double your volume? By how much did it expand the business? Did it double the size of your business?
Like 20 times. I mean, they had 30 people. Now they have probably 600-700 people.
Well, what happened?
Our overall business. So we meant, did it double our overall?
Yeah. I meant the size of
Steel warehouse.
steel warehouse.
Well, it depends how far back you want to say. I mean, when we took over the company in 1967, we had one plant here in South Bend. We probably had 150 guys in the shop. And we probably did 40,000 tons a year of steel. Now we do 1.5 million.
And
we have like 12 locations, including one in Mexico and one in Brazil. We are the major supplier to a number of big name OEMs, Caterpillar, Deere. There's couples. We're the biggest suppliers, I think, to those 2 companies in steel. We can process steel thicker than anybody in our business, stronger yield steels than anybody in our business. In some cases, it's not been successful economically yet.
Right, but
many of the things we've done over the years always started out that way. including many of the operations.
Now, you have stepped down as the CEO. What is your position now in the business?
I'm the chairman of the board. And I've never been good at a lot of the formal requirements of the CEO. I never drew a big chart with boxes of who reports to who and all that other stuff. I figured these guys don't know it. Come and ask me, or I'll kick your ass. You ought to know it. So now we have big HR department. We have this. We have all this other formalized stuff, and it's good because we're too big to not do it. You know, I was raised by a different approach to running a business.
Right.
And I still spend a lot of time in the shop with the guys. I know the guys. I know most all the guys here in the first shift. And I knew their fathers. And I actually spend a lot of my time with we have a number of engineers who are always trying to figure out something special to do that nobody else can do. And I travel a lot. I visit our other plants. I spot issues a little bit faster than a lot of the guys do because it just comes naturally to me.
Well, you had the engineering background that ended up working a lot for you, right?
Right. I had an engineering background, and it was certainly helpful.
And the ice hockey. That must have been helpful too.
Absolutely. At one point in our daily newspaper, I saw a picture of the new CEO of U.S. Steel in 2004. His name was John Surma, and the picture had him in a hockey outfit. He had played college hockey. He'd just been maybe a year earlier named the new CEO of U.S. Steel in their heyday. And they had bought a steel mill in Slovakia, where a lot of of course, actually all over the world in years earlier, the governments owned their steel mills. The democracies gave up on that because they quit trying to run businesses that they couldn't run well. But the Eastern Bloc still had a lot of those. And once they achieved freedom, they also kind of got out of owning their steel mills. And U.S. Steel bought this, actually, it was a pretty decent steel mill in Slovakia. And it was in a small town where the number one social relationship for everybody in town was a local hockey team. And this guy still is, but he's retired, but amazingly, very, very bright, high-end guy who also had a sense for people. And he went over to Slovakia and played hockey with the local hockey team. And U.S. Steel made a little donation to improve the rink, and he became a folk hero there. So I see this picture. I didn't know all that background. All I knew was that he obviously was a hockey player. So I wrote him a letter, and I said, although in a much smaller way, I may be the only other CEO in the steel business, that seems to share his love for hockey. Most of the big shots in our business all want to play that wimpy game called golf. And I think that's a big mistake. As tough as our business is, we need to have more guys that are ready to knock somebody on their ass than go around walking around with a golf stick. And then I got a call from him. He was, besides running that empire in Pittsburgh, he was coaching his kids when he could in youth hockey. And he started talking to me, and his kids had actually played a team from South Bend. And we had started an ice rink here. And everything he was going through with coaching his kids, I'd coached all my kids. So we ended up with a very nice, close relationship that made us, I'd like to think, helped both of us do more business together.
Very nice. That's a great story to end with.
Yeah, I think, Dave, we could go on all night, and maybe we will have you back for a second episode. But you've given us some great lessons, and I'm sure that not only our viewers and people that follow the podcast will enjoy it, but I think the family will too. Maybe even the Bodie family will.
Well, yes. But I was thinking when you have your annual get together, you can
We can play our
play the interview.
right.
Most of the people have heard the stories.
Not in detail, not in detail. Well, thanks so much, Dave.
In our families, a whole new generation that's coming up. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
they don't
that's
know.
right. They may not know.
maybe by then I won't remember what the heck I said. So it'll be recorded. Somebody.
That's why we're interviewing you now.
Exactly. All right.
Well, Dave, thanks so much. We're gonna let you go. And it's been a lot of fun. And as I say, we'll have to get back.
We sign off with Sei gesund.
Thanks. Nice to meet you.
Nice to
All
meet you.
right. See you later. Bye.